2 years since its historic vote for equal marriage, how has the country changed for its LGBTQ population? Has the increased visibility brought about through the referendum made a difference, or do old prejudices still prevail? Throughout this series, we'll highlight the breadth and colour of our community, our successes and supports, our talents and trailblazers, and discuss what it's like to be LGBTQ in Ireland.
Hi, my name is Tonie Walsh. I'm a romantic messer and independent curator of the Irish Queer Archive. There was something about the early stages of the campaign that seemed very woolly, that wasn't engaged enough with everyone, and sort of wasn't engaged beyond sort of a very small cohort of interest and support. But yeah, I think it was self-evident from halfway through the campaign that we were going to actually win. People deep down, when it became apparent that this was it was something deeply personal, I also think something changed, something shifted in the campaign, where it stopped being about allowing gay men and women to get married, and it became a discourse on the type of society we wanted to grow older in, and the type of society, a consideration of a fair and just society for our children and grandchildren and our nephews and nieces to grow up in. And I think the emphasis of the campaign actually pivoted at some point towards that sort of wider, more sort of abstract construct. And I think that's when many more people came on board as well.
If there was a feeling that, you know, it was going to happen eventually, was there still an emotional wallop for you when it did pass?
You've no idea how much of an emotional wallop there was for me. I mean, firstly, I have been living in Clonmel for the past 7 years, and I have a large window, about 3 by 1.7 metres, a window from my studio and office that looks onto one of the main streets in Clonmel. And for the referendum campaign, I decided to do a marriage equality installation. My sister and her daughter decided to actually make a large rainbow layered sponge cake, I mean this size, with a little small label that said civil marriage is a civil right, and then I had a strap line to accompany that said everyone deserves a slice of the wedding cake, everyone deserves a slice of history, or something sappy like that. And that window installation went up 2 days after I took my mother out of hospital, took her home knowing she was dying. And the cake, we put the cake into the window the morning she died, and I was jostling with whether I should actually put a status a post up on Facebook about actually the cake, or whether I should wait and do something about the fact that my mother died. And all of that week was just an extreme roller coaster of emotions. And actually, the day of the vote, my mother's dead 4 days, I took her voting card in with me into the polling booth, and I thought she would have loved to have actually been here, and she would have loved, I mean, she was a feminist, she would have so loved to have actually been part of that process and to have voted as well.
Did your awareness of your sexuality come hand in hand with awareness of the prejudice towards it?
Yeah, I mean, my only reference to homosexuality in 1970s Clonmel was Cosmo magazine, where I first saw a mainstream consumer title, where I actually saw a really gorgeous Bruce Weber, well, in the style of Bruce Weber, black and white photography of some male hotties, also they're languorously lying around the place with no clothes on, and Spare Rib, this feminist, English feminist zine. I probably realised I was gay from 1969, I would have been 8. And I didn't have a label for it because, of course, I mean, in the late 60s in Ireland, gay hadn't even entered our lexicon. I mean, just as a quick aside here, but the word gay was still being used in inverted commas by the Evening Herald up until 1989, which tells you something about the slow pace of change for some people, and the grudging acceptance of labels that had been determined by homosexual men and women. Labels, I mean, gay grew out of the jazz scene in New York in the 1920s, but it really came late to this country. They created a cloud of criminality around and taboo around every aspect of homosexuality. I mean, I think the lasting impact was that it subtly politicized people, and it allowed people to sort of imagine. Certainly I was part of that process where it allowed me, both individually and as collectively as part of a very small but ever-growing larger group of lesbians and gay men in the early 80s, to sort of imagine a new Ireland, to imagine new sexual identities for ourselves.
Because there was also not just, I think people will get, some people get caught up in the political, but an awful lot of people wouldn't be aware how physically dangerous it was.
Oh, no, shocking, absolutely. Listen, Dublin was shockingly dangerous at the time. And the Irish Centre was established in Temple Bar, one because there were cheap rents available, but it also was down a side street where you didn't run the risk of actually getting a hiding when you came out the place. You have these, when you look back, you have these sort of like highs of anti-gay violence. Gay men are being routinely beaten up in gay meeting places, whether it's public toilets or in parks or outside sort of the known gay bars that were beginning to come on stream in the early 80s. The really shocking thing, and the thing that I have to sometimes stop myself from getting bitter and annoyed about, is that there was no comeback to that sort of violence. And there was no legislative protection. That was going to come much, much later on.
So the worry would be now, because of the results of the referendum, that people would kind of take their foot off the gas, that people think we've achieved a certain amount and we should stop there. Where should the fight go now?
I think in terms of specific LGBT concerns, I think we have an aging demographic, represented by people like me, and no, actually even older. I mean, I'm only 54, but an aging demographic. excuse me, an aging demographic who also came of age and possibly came out in very straitened, even more straitened circumstances than me. As someone who's HIV positive, I think we have a lot of issues to deal with around how my generation coped with shocking destruction and loss of life. So yeah, I think they would be my immediate concerns: aging demographics, a greying demographic, trans identity, and HIV and AIDS as part of a wider discourse on sexual health education and also remembering the past. I mean, I have friends who, I call them the walking wounded, who've simply were never helped in developing an emotional response to losing all of their friends.
Tonie, that is brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
So my name is Noel Noblet and I'm part of the Emerald Warriors Rugby Football Club. The Emerald Warriors are a gay inclusive rugby team based in Dublin out of Sutonians Rugby Football Club. So they're welcoming all members of the public, whoever wants to play rugby, whether you're gay, straight, bi, no matter what your gender is, we're more than happy to accept you.
2 weeks time, let's go! Go, White!
So at this stage of the season, which is still very early, the season kind of goes from September on. So we've got 50 members at the moment and they're all signed up, and we hope to get a few more before the end of the season. There'll be a few players coming back that have yet to sign up officially yet. And we try and do like a recruitment drive every year, usually in the summer. So this year was probably one of our most successful. We've had well over 20 new members at this point, so the club is thriving at the moment. We play in the league throughout the year, so that's from September usually to about May, and that's in the Dublin League. Although some of the counties that surrounding Dublin do have teams in the league as well, so sometimes there's trips to Kilkenny or trips down to Wexford and things. But internationally wise, there's always one big tournament every year. So we have the Bingham Cup coming up in 2016 in May, so that's like the World Gay Inclusive Tournament, and that's actually going to be in Nashville. And then every alternating year then you've got the European tournament, and we're just back from Brussels in May for that, and we're going to Madrid then the year after next, so 2017.
He can rip the ball off you. He's probably the biggest problem we have at the moment, because these fellas can just smash you with the bag.
No, so in the Dublin League it's just predominantly straight teams. We're the only gay inclusive team that we know of in Dublin at the moment. So throughout the league, so most of our games are against normal straight teams, let's say. I'd say normal, but let's say straight teams. But when we go away to Bingham Cup and Union Cup, then it's mostly gay inclusive teams. Like, we're just another team when it comes to them, so they play us just as hard as they play anyone else, so there's no special treatment or there's no bad treatment, let's say. So to us, we're just like any other team. Yeah, so we kind of thrive on going out and having a bit of fun every now and again. We like to go out and, like, it's great for showing the club off, to try and get new members. We go out in our shirts and our Emerald Warrior tie just to try and kind of entice more people to come along. But generally, on a monthly basis, we'd probably have 1 or 2 nights out. Obviously, it's not mandatory to go or anything, but a lot of people usually turn out.
I played a little bit of rugby briefly in school. I was very rugby playing in school, and it was kind of mandatory, and I liked the game, I enjoyed the atmosphere. I found it very intimidating at the time, so when New Year rolled around this year, I like seeing the Warriors out, and I was like, that's something I want to try to do one day. It was something that I had decided, however it turned out, it was something I wanted to say I'd try it, but it's really surprised me with how much I've enjoyed it. It's been something it was something I was quite intimidated to do initially, but it's been much better than I could have anticipated.
My name is George Robotham. I'm on the board of Outhouse. The first meetings were held in 1994 and it was formally founded in 1996. Public meetings were held over that 2-year period to sort out what kind of a centre people wanted, and there were large attendances at meetings, public meetings, which actually led into how the company would be formed. It was important that it be a community resource and not some kind of a private facility, and that no one could ever make money out of it from their involvement other than obviously employees. It was really needed as a place for people to meet and commune, basically, and for both individuals to get information, support, and for groups to meet and help grow their activities. It's probably difficult to believe in 2015, but back then it was very difficult to get a meeting space. Hotels, I know personally, I can vouch for this, that hotels would refuse bookings when they know it was a lesbian or gay group. And occasionally you make a booking with a person on the staff who was quite accepting, but then you'd later get a call and a cancellation from a manager saying, no, we won't take you. The other point of view is when we actually went to try and rent a building, we found great difficulty in getting estate agents to even take us as clients. And some landlords we approached said no, we'd be too worried about what other tenants in the building would feel about lesbian and gays coming in and out of the building, which is kind of difficult, less than 20 years ago, to imagine that would be the case.
And is it important to try and give a sense of not just support but celebration about the community?
Oh, absolutely, that's a major part of it. We hold a number of different events. First of all, a lot of groups do their own activities, but we ourselves put on different events. We developed the basement as a theatre and performance space, as well as meeting space, with that in mind, and we do a lot of huge variety of activities that is in that vein of celebration and people just having a good, and particularly it's important because there are no other places other than public houses or clubs. So unlike other communities which might have a great variety of venues like different clubs, clubhouses and that where they meet, or churches where people actually meet regularly, etc. The lesbian, gay, transgender community don't have that. So it is important to have a space where people meet regularly, where the groups interact as well, and where they can easily get their post and arrange a meeting with no big hassle, no big trouble in booking or anything like that.
And some of the groups that you do deal with, like your peer support groups, could you tell us about some of them, like the Gold or the transgender support group?
Our main thing is to facilitate other groups. So over the years, Belong To started up from here. We were one of the organisations that were involved in the formation of Belong To. And we continue to support Belong To and to be very much partners with them in things we do. And they still use this facility. We actually, on a Sunday, keep the space free for young people. So it's only belonged to use during the day on a Sunday. And that's important that we do that. It was important to facilitate the transgender community. We were the first organisation to actually include transgender. From the very beginning, we included transgender in our target audience and participants. And we've had transgender people on staff and volunteers. And we're very much instrumental in supporting we started the Transgender Peer Support Group, which then led later to the formation of Tonie, which we supported over a number of years in different ways. And we continue to do so.
And what would you hope Outhouse can achieve going forward?
Our key plan is to have a purpose-built centre. This was always seen as a short term. We bought this building when we had an opportunity we had to move, and basically we decided rentals were so dear, we boldly went to the bank and went to our funders and said, listen, if you can give us this and you can give us that, can we marry the two? And we managed. It was probably one of the first for a community type event or organisation to actually get a mortgage, for instance, for a building. But it was very important for security because of that history that I outlined about the difficulty in getting place to rent even, and then when you get a place to rent, what can you do in that space? So that was extremely important. But we didn't only see it as a short term. Unfortunately, the economic crisis has intervened for the past few years, and we hadn't been able to push forward that idea of getting a purpose-built space. But it is something we're now addressing again, and we think we need a purpose-built centre that is large and caters for all elements of our community. Because people tend to forget, they have stereotyped images. They see, in the marriage campaign, the visibility was greatly increased, but it was people who were able to speak in the media, and they are seen as happy, and we're probably seen as more middle class. This is something that we would be conscious of here, that we'd have a great variety of people who use this building, and they weren't all represented in that campaign. Also older people. That marriage equality campaign was a very difficult time for older people. We did experience that here. They have lived under the radar for a great number, most of their lives, and suddenly the spotlight was being shone on them. That suddenly people started thinking, oh, I wonder, are you gay or are you lesbian? And that was discomforting for a lot of them. And also they felt that when the proposal went through, that life had passed them by. They weren't going to be able to avail of marriage. So it threw up a lot of issues for people, and even for people who are very happy and may get married, it threw up issues of acceptance and the negative side of the campaign. That was really upsetting for a lot of people. And that sort of thing doesn't go away quickly. It threw up difficulties with family members. Like, I know lots and lots of people who were afraid to ask some members of their immediate family how they had voted, because they didn't want to know if they had voted no. And I think that's something that is often forgotten, that there is another side of this. There is still a large section of the population that does not believe that we are LGBT citizens are equal. I mean, one of the most poignant stories ever was an 80-year-old man 2 years ago who was brought here by one of the workers in the hospice. And it was just something he had never had any contact with, lesbian and gay spaces, and it was something he wanted to do, and that was extremely moving for our staff and for our volunteers, but particularly for that man. And he came into the older men's group, which is Gold, which is a group for older men that meets here. He came in here a number of times, so that was very heartening. That shows the range of people that we get.